Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Geoffrey Farrar and David Depalo. First I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Geoffrey Farrar was born on September 27, 1944, and lived in Arlington, Virginia. He went by the name Jeff. He had a long career fixing microfilm cameras before he retired. Jeff had been married twice. His second wife lived in West Virginia, even though Jeff lived in Virginia. Jeff had an intense interest in rock climbing and was considered by his peers to have above-average skill in this discipline. Just about every day, he would climb at the Carter Rock Recreation Area near Bethesda, Maryland. This park was only about 13 miles from his residence. Jeff did not always exercise the best judgment in his climbing adventures. It was not unusual for him to climb 30 or 40 feet up rock faces without using a rope. He had been severely injured a few times after falling. Jeff wasn't just flirting with death, they were in a committed relationship. Despite being considered a little reckless by some, Jeff was thought of as a leader and a teacher in the rock climbing community at Carter Rock. He mentored various climbers over the years, including a man named David Dipalo, who went by the name Dave. Jeff became Dave's mentor when Dave was just a teenager, and the two climbers maintained this relationship for over 15 years. Dave had been born in Canada, but lived with his father Vince in Bristow, Virginia. Between 1999 and 2003, Dave was hospitalized 4 times for mental illness. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and allegedly used drugs including oxycodone, cocaine, and heroin. For the most part, he lived in his silver Hyundai minivan, which he would park by the Potomac. He was literally living in a van down by the river, which is not as inspirational in real life as Chris Farley made it seem. To make a living, Dave allegedly engaged in petty theft, had a small income from a trust fund, and worked in construction part-time. He kept his tools in his minivan. Over the years, he had many negative interactions with law enforcement. He was detained in 2006 for allegedly assaulting his sister's fiancé, and the police suspected he was involved in gang activity in Baltimore. As far as his reputation in the rock climbing community, Dave demonstrated a good deal of talent, but he was not attentive to safety concerns. In 2011, there was an incident that severely damaged his standing. He was helping another climber to descend a rock face in West Virginia, but the rope was shorter than Dave realized, and it did not have a proper knot at the end. The other climber fell 40 feet and sustained a broken wrist. Many of the rock climbers did not trust Dave after this, but Jeff continued to be his mentor. Arguably, this relationship is the only reason Dave could still participate as a member of the community at all. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On December 27, 2013, while Jeff and Dave were at Carter Rock, Dave started talking to a group of climbers he had never met. A couple of the men in the group became upset with Dave because he simply would not leave them alone. Some people also reported that Dave may have taken a hat from a park visitor. Jeff intervened and prevented the argument from turning physical. Dave was upset by this and viewed Jeff as unsupportive. On the next day, December 28, 2013, 69-year-old Geoffrey Farrar was back at Carter Rock as usual. There were 4 other climbers there that day. His 63-year-old friend, John Gregory, a 67-year-old man, a 59-year-old woman, and 31-year-old Dave Depalo. Not long before 2 p.m., John and another climber saw Dave running on the trail. Dave did not respond when his name was called. He just kept running. About 10 seconds later, John and the other climber went around a bend and discovered a horrific scene on the trail. Jeff was on the ground, face down, bleeding, and gasping for air. It was clear that he had sustained massive head injuries. John Gregory called 911. Emergency responders ended up using a helicopter to transport Jeff to Suburban Hospital. Jeff died there from his injuries at 8 p.m. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. Initially, physicians indicated that Jeff's injuries could have come from a fall, but this seemed inconsistent with the scene. For example, Jeff was found almost 10 feet from the base of the rock face. His blood was found several feet from where he would have landed if he had fallen. No one saw Jeff climbing the rock face at any point during that day, and there was no magnesium carbonate chalk on his hands. He always used chalk when climbing. The autopsy revealed even more reasons to be skeptical about the idea that a fall created the injuries. Jeff had sustained penetrating wounds in 4 places: the top of his head, the back of his head, his right temple, and his jaw. If Jeff had slammed his head into the ground after falling, there probably would have been only one massive injury to his head. It appeared as though the injuries had been caused by something like a hammer, but no hammer was found at the scene. No objects at all were found there consistent with the damage Jeff sustained. The only other injuries that Jeff had were lacerations on the back of his hands. The police thought that these could have been defensive wounds. It seemed very unlikely that Jeff could have sustained this pattern of injuries from a fall. His cause of death was ruled penetrating trauma. His manner of death, homicide. Investigators focused on witness statements indicating that Dave Depalo ran away just before Jeff was discovered on the ground. They learned that the argument the men had one day earlier had reignited in the parking lot not long before Jeff was mortally wounded. Dave told Jeff that he was just an old man who nobody liked, and invited Jeff to punch him. No physical altercation was witnessed. Instead, Jeff went to the rock face where he was later found, and Dave walked to his minivan. Jeff mentioned to another climber that he had stood up for Dave for years, but that was over now. It appeared as though the friendship between the men had come to its end. Perhaps that was a motive for Dave to kill Jeff. The police were eager to find Dave and ask him a few questions about what happened. They discovered that Dave had called his father and indicated that he needed to get away. On this call, Dave appeared to be emotional. Dave drove to the state of New York and stayed with relatives, but then he left that residence and continued driving north. On December 30, 2013, Dave's father called the police and said that Dave left him a voicemail and had used a debit card in New York. The police were able to figure out that Dave had borrowed a phone from a clerk at a gas station in Chatham, New York, before continuing his drive north. On January 8, 2014, the police found Dave in Glen Falls, New York, 78 miles north of Chatham. No arrest warrant had been issued. The police asked him if he would agree to an interview at a substation. Dave said that he would, and he waited there for 8 hours as investigators assigned to the case drove to New York. After the interview started, the police noticed that Dave wasn't speaking loudly or making a lot of eye contact. Initially, he claimed he didn't remember what happened at Carter Rock on the day Jeff died. Later in the interview, Dave offered a different story. Here's what he told the police. Dave admitted that he and Jeff argued in the parking lot, but they walked away from each other. There was no fight. Not long after this, as Dave was walking near the base of the rock face where Jeff's body was found, Jeff surprised him and started strangling him. The 2 men fell to the ground and rolled around as the struggle continued. As Dave was losing consciousness, he noticed a claw hammer with a red handle, which just happened to be on the ground within reach. This was incredibly convenient considering his desperate situation. Dave grabbed the hammer with his right hand and struck Jeff in self-defense. After Jeff was hit, he released his grip and Dave escaped. Frightened by how the situation looked, Dave decided to run away. He threw the hammer into the Potomac River as he left. In a written statement that Dave gave to the police, he wrote, quote, "I'm sorry this happened. I didn't want it to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen," unquote. The police arrested Dave for killing Jeff. They believed that he committed second-degree murder, but the evidence did not support that charge. Instead, Dave was charged with voluntary manslaughter. This was a federal charge because the killing took place on land managed by the National Park Service. As the investigation continued, the police searched the Potomac River for the hammer used in the killing, but they never found it. Dave received court-appointed attorneys. They pursued an insanity defense, but Dave was not happy with that choice. He did not trust his attorneys and did not believe he was mentally ill. In early 2015, he tried to fire his attorneys. In late 2015, Dave demanded that he be declared competent so he could function as his own attorney. He insisted that he was competent, could cite the law, would not cause any problems, and said, quote, "I'm no troublemaker," unquote. Despite this effort, Dave continued to be represented by attorneys. A plea bargain was reached with the federal government. On February 8, 2016, Dave Depalo pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. He admitted that he sought Jeff out and struck him multiple times in the head with a claw hammer. On July 18, 2016, Dave was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The maximum sentence for this offense was 15 years. In early 2023, Dave was released from prison. It's not clear where he ended up, but some people believed he moved to Colorado. Now moving to my analysis. Dave Depalo pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, but law enforcement believed he was guilty of second-degree murder. Some people have even argued that Dave was guilty of first-degree murder, like he premeditated the killing of Jeff. This brings me to the question, was Dave guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Dave had multiple negative interactions with law enforcement in his history and allegedly used substances. He admitted that he used a hammer to kill Jeff, although he claimed it was in self-defense as Jeff was trying to strangle him. The problem is, Dave's story doesn't quite add up. For example, Dave and Jeff argued in the parking lot, but then the men separated. It was Dave who re-engaged after stopping by his minivan to get the hammer. Dave introduced the weapon into this confrontation. He could have approached Jeff without bringing a weapon. One of the injuries caused by the hammer was on the back of Jeff's head. It would have been difficult for Dave to inflict that wound if Jeff was really strangling him. The witnesses who saw Dave running away said that his clothes were clean, yet he claimed he was rolling around on the ground with Jeff. And what are the chances that a claw hammer would just happen to be on the ground within reach of a man who was being attacked? Maybe Dave summoned the hammer like Thor from the Avengers. After supposedly defending himself from a potentially lethal attack by Jeff, Dave decided to run away. He not only left the park, he left the state of Maryland and drove all the way to New York. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. Even though the government could have proved that Dave was lying, that doesn't necessarily mean he was guilty of second-degree murder. It was still possible that Jeff provoked Dave, even if Dave brought the hammer with him to the confrontation. Jeff had a reputation for provoking physical altercations. For example, one time Jeff yelled at children who were throwing rocks in the Potomac River, which almost resulted in a physical fight between him and a man who was accompanying the children. On another occasion, Jeff refused to move equipment from beneath a rock face that two climbing instructors were getting ready to climb. This situation almost resulted in a physical fight. Jeff was described as antagonistic, rigid, opinionated, paranoid, and overly critical of others. He made false claims about working for the CIA, did not trust banks, and kept money buried in his backyard. Given Jeff's characteristics, one could reasonably believe that he provoked Dave. Maybe Dave responded with too much force, but that still does not rise to the level of second-degree murder. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Dave was guilty of murder? In my opinion, he was guilty of second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Dave sought out a confrontation while in possession of a weapon. I believe that Dave struck Jeff in the back of the head and continued his attack when Jeff turned around to defend himself. The government made a mistake by failing to pursue a second-degree murder charge. Now Dave is loose in society. Who knows what he'll do? Moving to the last question, why did Dave kill Jeff? This is just a theory, my opinion. I think this case is straightforward. Dave was impulsive, angry, and violent. One person who knew him indicated he possessed a rage which intensified as he grew older, and he hated criticism. Jeff was argumentative, confrontational, and loved to criticize people. He broke off the relationship with Dave due to Dave's alleged behavior. Dave was unhappy with the termination of the friendship. As it turns out, their relationship was an anchor for Dave. With the rope of friendship severed, he was sliding down the mountain. Jeff thought he was walking away. Dave thought he was being pushed off a cliff. The tragedy is that neither one recognized how close they already were to the edge. I have covered many cases involving romantic relationships that highlight how danger escalates immediately after a breakup. The same holds true for friendships, even if it's less common. The risk is even greater if one person is abrasive and the other person is unstable, as was the case here. It was fitting that Jeff and Dave liked rock climbing because together they were a volcano, always rumbling beneath the surface, and one day it finally erupted. Those are my thoughts on the case of Geoffrey Farrar and David Depalo. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.